Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Mobility Studio info session. It's a pleasure to have you all here. We're going to kick off in just a moment with a brief overview of New Lab as a company, and then I'm going to invite some of my colleagues onto the screen to share a bit more about the studio specifically, and chat through any questions or thoughts that the group may have here. So I'll go ahead and kick it off now. Some of you may have the background on New Lab, but for those of you who do not, New Lab is based in Brooklyn, New York, and we're home to a community of entrepreneurs and innovators on a mission to apply emerging technology to address major industry and civic challenges. So leveraging technologies across a range of domains, including things like robotics, AI, and computer vision, New Lab's overarching goal is to use these technologies to transform the things that matter most. And we work toward this mission through two primary components. The first is our membership community, which is made up of over 800 entrepreneurs, engineers, and inventors that have access to our space and a suite of digital and physical resources to help their companies scale. And the second component is New Lab's Innovation Studios, which we run in partnership with Fortune 500 companies or government entities or social impact investors, basically any organization that sees a role for emerging technology in solving its challenges and wants a dedicated channel to tap into our community and startups from across the world to co-design and test sustainable and scalable solutions. My colleague Drayton Taylor will provide more information about the Mobility Studio shortly, which is a great example of what these studios look like in practice. And then here are a few stats to give you a better sense of our community. New Lab's membership includes more than 160 companies, which have raised north of $700 million in funding and represent a collective value of $2.6 billion. Members have access to 110,000 square feet of space across 2 locations, which include prototyping labs, collaborative workspaces, private offices, conference rooms, and several event spaces. We also have a full-time product realization team and over $5 million of on-site equipment to help our members take a concept from an idea to a full working prototype. This includes access to 3D printing, CNC, wood and metal shops, textiles, electronic benches, and an agriculture lab, as well as one-on-one consultations with the product realization team and regular trainings that are available. And New Lab has 2 physical locations in Brooklyn, New York, which you can see on this slide here. Our headquarters is housed in an 84,000 square foot former shipbuilding facility in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And the Navy Yard is a 300-acre industrial campus that in a lot of ways operates like a mini city and can function as a living lab for our member companies to test out products and technologies really in their own backyard without some of the kind of red tape and hurdles that come with testing in other public spaces. And a short walk away, we have an additional location in Brooklyn with more workspace and conference rooms to really accommodate some of our members and companies that have started to scale and grow their teams. And then lastly, we're excited to be expanding our physical footprint to Detroit. And as we solidify those plans in the near future, we're currently set up in a beta space in the Corktown neighborhood of Detroit. So at New Lab, we're proud to be home to a dynamic community of members. Here's just a couple of stats. 70% of our founders have a master's degree or doctorate, 39% are serial entrepreneurs, and 38% have actually relocated to our headquarters from cities outside of New York. These characteristics really all contribute to creating an ecosystem here that's representative of a diverse set of perspectives and really helps to bring a unique lens to the work that we do. So a bit more on our community here. New Lab has really created an interactive and networked community for our member base. So in addition to some of the physical resources that I mentioned, our members have access to networking opportunities and exclusive programming from subject matter experts relevant to their work. And this can be vetted experts that really help to navigate legal or communications or kind of business development considerations, basically anything you'd be thinking about as you're building and scaling your business. We also offer strategic introductions from the entire New Lab team and others in our network, and that can be in an advisor capacity, it could be investors or even potential customers or collaborators for our companies. We have an OS system, and this really enables our members to connect with others in the community and provides a great kind of seamless experience for accessing all of the resources that are provided by New Lab. And finally, we have a very active Slack channel. So that's made available for kind of quick answers to questions and casual conversation in real time. And as I touched on at the start, New Lab partners with a variety of entities, from Fortune 500 companies to business improvement districts to foundations, who all share in the common goal of wanting to understand how they can connect with New Lab, our ecosystem, and really leverage emerging tech to move the needle on big challenges. And this is a nice segue into our partnership with Ford and Michigan Central and the Mobility Studio specifically. So I'm going to pass it over now to Drayton Taylor, our program manager that's running this studio.
Thanks, Kate. So now that everyone knows what New Lab is, let's dive into the Mobility Studio, which is focused on shaping an electrified, connected, and autonomous future. The Mobility Studio is a collaboration between Ford, Michigan Central, and New Lab, which will support startups and entrepreneurs as they build, pilot, and scale frontier technologies to advance the future of mobility. The first focus area the studio is tackling is EV charging in the urban context, specifically from the commercial fleet perspective. By 2040, commercial fleets are expected to adopt nearly 15 million EVs in the US. So commercial fleets present a transformational opportunity for teams across discipline to design and launch pilots that make it technically feasible and commercially viable for fleets to electrify and support a sustainable energy future. So these are the focus areas the studio is recruiting startups to address, starting with multi-use charging hubs. These hubs create an opportunity to share and consolidate charging infrastructure resources across multiple commercial fleets to maximize utility and share infrastructure costs. Supporting drivers who take their vehicles home, many fleet drivers use their work vehicles as their personal vehicles as well. This presents a challenge for fleet managers, and we need to be able to enable fleet drivers to charge and easily maintain their electric work vehicles from residents that might not currently be equipped to do so, including multi-unit dwellings and apartment complexes. Connected fleet management, being able to unlock the power of shared data to streamline fleet operations with charging needs and battery rages, and using the data to predict when and where charging should be available. EV to X, reducing maintenance costs for electrified fleet by enabling bidirectional charging and V2G energy management systems, platforms for EVs as resilience systems, and V2V charging platforms. And then finally, we have second life battery applications. So once a battery can no longer satisfy the requirements for use in EVs anymore, with capacity and performance dropping, how might we enable supply chain solutions to apply second life EV batteries to solve other industry challenges? So why join? The studio presents a unique opportunity for companies to apply their technologies to pressing electrification challenges and validate them in the industry through pilots. The studio also offers a non-dilutive grant pool of $200,000 to offset the costs associated with companies' pilots, which will be equally dispersed among the, typically we accept 5 to 10 teams in the cohort. And these teams will also have exposure to our network of investors, corporate partners, and programs. Studio participants will also have access to prototyping space, like Kate mentioned, industry experts, and New Lab's community of over 160 startup companies scaling transformative technology. So this is a high-level snapshot of the Mobility Studio timeline. Our open call launched April 28th and will remain open until June 2nd. So applications are being cut off at June 2nd. So please, if you're applying to the studio, make sure you're getting your application in before next Wednesday. And applications will also be reviewed on a rolling basis. So the earlier you submit, the more access you will have to ask questions, as well as for us to socialize your application amongst our own team, as well as get it in front of Ford. And to best help with the planning of pilot resource access, please be upfront with what kinds of resources and support you need to be successful. During the review process in June, applications will be assessed by New Lab and Ford and by external industry experts. We'll also be reaching out to teams if we have any questions, which again may include setting up one-on-one calls to deep dive pilot proposals. We'll notify teams of their status in early July. And then piloting will happen on a rolling basis starting in July and will continue through September. And then before pilots launch, we'll also work with the teams as well as industry experts to set up individualized pilot plans. Finally, the studio is going to culminate in a demo day happening in October, where we'll work with Ford and studio partners to explore pathways for partnership and follow-on engagement. So now I'd like to introduce Arthur Orduna, a studio advisor and former Chief Innovation Officer at Avis Budget Group, to the stage to answer some questions about the industry and studio.
Hey, Drayton. Hi, everybody. Interesting stage. I'm enjoying this.
Good to have you here, Arthur. So I was wondering if we could just start off, like, tell us about your background and your experience in the mobility industry.
Sure. Up until last November, I was the Chief Innovation Officer for Avis Budget Group. I originated the role back in 2016. And the focus for Avis Budget, which also owns Zipcar, was a global one. In short, what we were focused on was first leveraging new technologies, products, partnerships, platforms to help improve and innovate on the core business of rental and rideshare as one of the world's largest commercial fleet owners. And the second was to support and identify new mobility businesses and business opportunities and markets for fleet as a service, mobility service. And that also meant supporting and identifying new technologies that act, self-driving, autonomous technologies, and obviously electrification.
Absolutely, great. And so what do you see as the key problems that commercial fleets face as they consider this transition to an electrified fleet?
Well, this is something that we were, and I'll be blunt about it, we were struggling with on a global basis and starting to make some inroads in Europe, but definitely very nascent here in North America. I think to take a step away, though, from just one fleet owner and to try to think about it generally, I see really four key problems, Drayton. And I think these are translated really well by the New Lab team into the challenges in the studio. I think that the first one is all of these commercial fleets operate today on legacy and sometimes new business models. And I think the first and most important aspect of their business is how are their models going to be changed or impacted by electrification and by all aspects of electrification. I'll give you an example that most people outside of the rental industry don't really think about, which is that in the rental car industry, fuel is a revenue. So gas purchase of customers is a really, really large revenue element for all rental companies globally. How is that going to be replaced when they look at electrification? And that's just one of, I think, many, many issues. Second issue, I think, Drayton, is all of these commercial fleet owners already have, whether it's local, whether it's state or regional, in some cases national, and in the cases of the really large companies like my previous one, global, there are established operational processes, established facilities, support and maintenance and supply chain that really all of them will be impacted by electrification. So the real issue there too is trying to identify how is this going to impact my partners, right? And who is going to support me as I move forward on this, really, really impacting the overall economics. I think that kind of points to the third one, which we've heard in our discussions, as the New Lab team with several commercial fleet owners that we've talked to over the last several months, which is really, how do you start, right? Where do you start? And how do you really begin to think about piloting? And they're all looking for partners and for solutions that also understand that their fleets are not going to transform to complete EV overnight, right? That there's going to be a really extended period of managing and running a multiple fleet of both internal combustion engine as well as electrified vehicles. And I think the final issue, Drayton, is the fact that EV goes hand in hand with connectivity, right? And so I think a lot of these commercial fleet owners need to actually deal with, and they want to deal with, how do they support a fleet that's going to become increasingly connected? How do they manage that? Because every EV vehicle that they're going to deal with will be connected, but they're going to get connectivity across their fleets first. So I think if you look at those four kind of key problems, that's what every commercial fleet owner, regardless of what their business model, regardless of their geography and their intent, that's what they're all facing.
Absolutely. And so with EVs being present in the industry for several years now, why do you believe that commercial fleet electrification is relevant and important now, and why is it relevant to Ford?
I think that it's the relevancy and the timing is because they're now seeing every major OEM putting significant investment and significant commitment into electrification. I come from the Midwest, and I think one of the sayings there is, the barn door is open, horses have left, right? And I think the last couple of years, you could argue that there was still a little bit of prevarication or some hesitation, but now Ford, to the latter part of your question, which is a significant player as an OEM in terms of commercial vehicle. I mean, just the announcements that the Ford team have made under CEO Jim Farley, are really exciting, right? And the fact that the first commercial vehicle outside of I would call it their statement vehicle, like we've talked about, Drayton, right? Which is, the Mustang that they announced the other year. But now that the fact that the first Ford vehicle that's coming out electrified at scale announced was the Transit, which is their top selling commercial vehicle, and now followed by really the powerhouse vehicle of Ford, which is the F-150, right? And so that is such a bright signal that there is no going back. Electrification is there. And so on the flip side, for commercial fleet managers who do the purchasing, as well as their counterparts on the operational side who do the management and maintenance, now it's not a matter of just like, okay, let's deal with it later. As you and I have seen in discussions with some of these commercial fleet owners, they're now really starting to say, okay, well, darn, how many do I start buying this year or next year? And how do I actually start incorporating that? How can I keep this sane, right? And what's this going to mean in terms of if I start thinking about my purchasing the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years? How does that shift my economics, right, on the procurement side? And if they're going through kind of that kind of head scratching today, just on the purchasing side, you and I have heard the operational managers of those fleets really now saying, okay, this electrification stuff, what the heck, right? And so a lot of the efforts, I think, of the studio and hopefully of the participants on the technology side are actually going to deal with both of them, right? We'll deal with how do new technologies help affect the business model and the business of these commercial fleets, and at the same time, how do these new technologies help aid the transition, on the management and supply chain and on the operational side?
Absolutely. No, that's a great answer. And I'd like to actually flip the script on you because you started to touch on it a little bit, but why do you think that this is actually an exciting opportunity for startups? Specifically, with participating in a mobility studio like this, what is the benefit as opposed to going to a traditional accelerator?
I think the first one is the fact that you've got one of the most important, let alone one of the largest global OEMs, backing and sponsoring this particular studio, and Team Edison, obviously their EV team that's leading the charge as a close partner of New Lab on this. And so I think number one is just the fact that this isn't just speculative, but the fact that this is substantive, right? And having been on the startup side in previous industries myself, I think that having that kind of a corporate partner who can make market for new technologies, not just proof new technologies, that's pretty extraordinary, right? I think that's definitely number one. And then I think the second one, in terms of exciting opportunity for startups, is just the convergence, I think, Drayton, of so many different types of technologies and solutions that can come to play here, right? I know that, when I first started working with the New Labs team, at the end of last year, as your corporate advisor, right, on the innovation studios, I was really impressed by the fact that the discussions you'd already had with Ford were really very 360, right, in terms of thinking about electrification, right? Not just focused on the technologies within the vehicles, but really looking at the entire environment end to end of the journey of their commercial customers, right, of their fleet customers. In fact, just talking, the fact that you've identified, multi-hub, thinking about charging, second life of batteries, which is really, and when you think about it, what are the additional revenue opportunities for a commercial fleet owner? I think that just broadens, really broadens the spectrum of the kinds of, pioneer and early stage technologies, that could come into this cohort and into follow-on cohorts, I think, for the studio.
Absolutely. I think we might have time for maybe one more question, because I see some questions rolling in from the audience as well.
Sure.
But you mentioned early on the fact that one of the largest OEMs in the world, Ford, backing a studio like this provides a lot of value. Why does it make sense for industry leaders like Ford to even work with startups? Can't they do this all on their own?
It's interesting. That's something we faced as Avis Budget Zipcar. One of the largest fleet owners in the world with well close to 2 million vehicles around the world in 180 countries, and you'd think we wouldn't need any help. Actually, I think the best leaders are the ones who understand their gaps, right? And I applaud Ford for welcoming early companies to forward with solutions where they know and they acknowledge they need the help, and where they're actually looking, for early stage and mid stage companies to come in with the innovative ideas, to come in, with these solutions that they will partner with, right? And so I think Ford I think Ford has shown that kind of spirit. I know other OEMs and other large industry leaders in mobility and in adjacent industries are doing the same thing. And just hats off to New Lab, because you're showcasing that in mobility with Ford, but you've already showcased it with others like Verizon in the 5G studio, right?
Absolutely. And even to piggyback off that, having been at GM on the incubator and accelerator team, and having seen the rise and fall of initiatives like the Arrive Bike and Maven, which was their Airbnb for cars Turo model, it's not easy for corporations to innovate beyond their core business. And so that's really an opportunity for startups to take a lead and help show them how to innovate.
Yeah, that's well said. Having led innovation at 2 Fortune 300 companies in 2 different industries, you are absolutely right.
Okay, I'm happy to jump in here. As Drayton mentioned, we've got a number of questions pouring in, so I'm going to get right to it. Drayton, maybe you could take this first one. What kind of support will the studio provide for pilots? So things like helping to find locations or potentially participating fleet customers or resources. How is the studio going to handle that?
Absolutely. And so that's really dependent on individual team needs. New Lab is going to work with Ford and additional studio partners to ensure sufficient resources are available to enable pilot success. So resources may include fleet data access, fleet manager and driver access, vehicle and battery, hardware and data access. So the best help with the planning of pilot resources, it's very helpful to be upfront in your applications with what you need to be successful. But we will do our best to support however we can.
Excellent. And another question here is if you could shed a little bit of light around some of the criteria that the kind of review team will be looking for as we're selecting applicants.
Absolutely. So at the end of the day, we are executing on Ford's vision for electrification. So we are in line with their strategy, and we look at things like technical feasibility of projects, things that can have a short-term as well as lasting impact on the transition to fleet electrification, the desirability for fleet customers, the novelty and uniqueness of ideas. I'd say those were the main criteria that we look at when we see these pilots or pilot proposals and applications come in.
Great, thank you. Here's another question that I'm happy to maybe take a first stab at and then Drayton chime in, but it's a question around the time commitment of the mobility studio. And so I think I'd say first and foremost, it is a little bit dependent on what pilot you're proposing, and some may be more involved, some may be a little less, some may be happening kind of digitally or remotely, others may require on-site access. And so of course, there's some individual things that go into determining time commitment, but we're definitely looking for a team that kind of has the bandwidth and the capacity to be present. There will be multiple touch points throughout the course from July through the end of the studio in October, where they'll need to be available for virtual meetings, some potential in person. So all those details will be made available as we move along in the process, but I would think about it as that kind of chunk of time and ensuring that there's someone on your team or that your team has the bandwidth to engage in a meaningful way with the studio team and with the Ford representatives that are participating. Great. And then another one here, Drayton, maybe you can take this. Does the Mobility Studio or Ford take any equity in the cohort companies that participate?
No, the $200,000 is a grant pool. It's equity free. So it's split up depending on how many companies are taken within the cohort. Again, typically 5 to 10 companies taken. So if there are 10 companies taken, $20,000 will be allocated to each company. 5 companies taken, it'd be $40,000 to each company. And again, it's a grant, so no equity is taken.
Awesome. And then maybe I'm going to flip a question over to Arthur that I see in here. I'd be interested for your perspective. Someone's asking about where do you see data monetization opportunities in this space?
Yeah, I saw that one as well. And I want to do a shout out to that person because he used to work with me. So hi, John. I hope things are going well. I know they're going well over there. And so in terms of data monetization opportunities, overarching answer is yes. I think from a commercial fleet perspective, the safest way to think about data monetization is to look at data that is not associated with specific drivers or with, even though those drivers may be your employees, but instead to look at data from the actual vehicles themselves. And the first and bluntly safest way to think about it is data that can help with preemptive maintenance and data that can help with the overall value and the quality of the fleet. And that's why I'm saying that connected fleet data, even as you're starting to transition in EVs, I think is going to be absolutely critical because it will help with it'll help with the changing business models as you start shifting to electrification as well. So that's a mouthful. The summary is look first for data monetization from the operation of your fleet, as opposed to data from the driver behavior of your drivers and employees.
Amazing, thank you, Arthur. So I think we'll go just a couple minutes over because I think there's a few more questions if folks are able to hang around. So Drayton, is it necessary for cohort companies to have somebody on site or on location?
So it's not necessary to be on site in Michigan. New Lab's going to work with studio participants to identify the potential pilot locations based on individual project needs again, ideally leveraging Ford, Michigan Central, and New Lab and studio partner infrastructure. Given the short development period for pilots and the current state of deployed commercial EVs in the US, we anticipate some pilots may need to take place virtually or as simulations. But we do ask the teams be available at those specific milestones during the studio to do reviews and present.
Great, thank you. And then we have a question here from a company who works on electric vehicle control systems and is kind of asking, are you only accepting companies that strictly fit within the focus areas of the open call? So maybe you could talk a bit of kind of how we think about those focus areas and sort of how to approach that if you feel like maybe your technology doesn't squarely fit. What's the best approach there?
It's hard to say without knowing exactly what the application would be. I'd say it doesn't hurt to apply and to get that in front of us. We can always help socialize it within our team and get it in front of Ford in case there is synergy within the studio. Ultimately, we have focus areas laid out, but the overall goal is how do we help commercial fleets electrify? If you have an application that can help do that, then I strongly recommend applying.
Okay, great, good answer. And then I think we've got one more question maybe that I'm happy to answer. There's a question about a near-term opportunity for autonomy technology. And I think I'll just say that the studio overall is positioned as looking at kind of the future of mobility, and autonomous vehicles are certainly a key part of that. The first track and focus of the mobility studio is electrification. And so that's why we're kind of focusing on these areas right now. Not to say that there won't be an opportunity in the future. So definitely stay in touch if you have a specific technology around autonomy that you'd like to explore. But for the purposes of this track and this open call, we are focused on electrification. So with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Drayton to kind of wrap us up.
Yeah, I'd say really quick, if you do think that you have autonomous or other mobility relevant applications, feel free to email us. Let us know, because this studio is more than just electrification. We have a longer term vision for it. So if you want to put yourself on our radar so we can keep you in mind with future opportunities, please do so. And then finally, just to wrap up, thank you everyone for your time today. We hope this was helpful and hope to see applications from everyone. Don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. We're always available to hop on a call if necessary. And thank you, Arthur, for your time as well.
Oh, thank you. It's been great supporting the studio. I'm looking forward to continuing to support it as we go through the selection process and then the launch. So it's been a blast.
Perfect.
Take care, everyone.